Merhabalar, hepiniz hoş geldiniz. 2 gündür yoğun bir tempoda devam ediyor.
Hi and welcome. We have been continuing in a high tempo for the last 2 days. And it is indeed, there's a great preparation behind it. There's a huge attendance and we are benefiting a lot. And this is the last session in every hall. And the advantages of the last hall, it's got advantages and disadvantages, because there are disadvantages. There are people who are traveling and those who are about to miss their planes, but there is no other presentation that is awaiting us. So we're going to get all questions that you have, because we don't have any time limit, and I have got the confirmation from the participants in the renewable energy, a new page in renewable energy investments and wind power plants for self-consumption. We're going to talk about the industry-facing aspect of this. And indeed, the renewable energy investments are not like normal classical energy investments. When they first start, it was an energy investment to begin with. What does this mean? Investment activities in energy areas, and when it comes to energy trading, they've got their own experiences, their muscles are developed, and this is how it was done. And the license-free legislation with the passing of this in 2013, this changed somewhat, but even if it's one light bulb of consumption, because they can build facilities, up until May 2019, they were, it's a new page that began in May 2019. So this is a self-consumption model that the process has turned into. And this is exactly what we want to talk about. How did the license-free investments began? Where did it come to? Where it will be headed? What kind of opportunities and what kind of risks are awaiting us? We've got participants, speakers, from Mr. Bora from Dere Construction, Mr. Erdem from the Development Bank, Mr. Serkan from Emra, again Mr. Meriç from EPİAŞ, and also the sponsor of our session, Mr. Enercon Sales Manager, Mr. İsmet Haber. So technology, turbine, investor financing, producer, generator, we are all here. Without further ado, I'd like to start with Mr. Bora, because he's going to explain where we came from and what kind of risks are awaiting us. And if you can share your ideas and opinions with us, we will be grateful. Thank you, and I would like to thank everyone for their attendance. I'm here both as an industrialist and on the EPC side. I'm the owner of an undertaking company that has wind investments, and I'm going to talk about the challenges and how the industrialists can eliminate it and what are the measures and improvements that can be done. To begin with, as you most know, the license-free regulations, it was passed in 2013 and it was improved a lot. Article 5.1c stipulated that anyone, any consumer that has a registration can build a facility up to 1 megawatt, they said, and then this power limit was increased to 110 and then it was brought to 1.1. So in the beginning, even a household consumer could invest to 1.1, and then it came to 1.1 where it should be. This is the 5.1c, and then 5.1c with the Turkish C with the saddle underneath. The consumers could build a license-free plant on the roofs of their factories, and then recently, this is very widespread, 5.1h regulation, which stipulates that big factories, small and medium scale, they can make energy investments for their own consumptions as well as sell the excess. The industrialists had to make a decision whether it's solar or wind. Solar, to be frank, it is the peanuts part of this. Forgive my expression. It's easily done, and permits-wise, it's easier. But we are as EPC on the wind side, and we have close to 250 megawatts of wind portfolio. So we are in the wind world, and there are significant differences and there are positive aspects. And a factory, when you make a decision, whether it's wind or solar, with a very rough calculation, if the factories, such factories, are working for 10 hours and above, if they make a shift production, let's imagine 120 megawatts, but 40 megawatt installed capacity is allowed if you have 20 megawatts. This is one part of the limitation. And then there is a consumption restriction. Let's say that this 20 megawatt consumption factory, if there's a 10 megawatts of average drawing, if they work 24 hours for 300 days, there's about 60 megawatts. So in addition to the 60 million kilowatt hours, they can also sell 60 million kilowatt hours as 5/1H. And if they want to do solar, not wind, so if they want to have 40 megawatts of solar, imagining that it works 1500, they can deduct the 60 million kilowatts, but they cannot benefit from the one-time that additional capacity. So will I have solar that works 1500 hours, or shall I do wind that works 3000 hours? So they opt for wind. This is where they face challenges, the companies, because like I said in the beginning, solar compared to wind is a process that can be managed much easily, but there are other pluses and minuses which I'm going to talk about now. Currently, these factories, they made their decisions, and they want to do wind, and they are on the field, because mostly they cannot make it on factory fields. Only they can do it if they have huge areas. So they go for outer lots, and they will have to go to individuals, because forests and pastures cannot be given to unlicensed agencies. Their distances to residential areas must be protected because of the audio of the blades, and they have to choose the lands and the projection, the blade. They have to have lots that are as big as the blades. If they're going to have more than one blade, they have to be careful about 3x or 7x strong winds. A windy site must be found, and the blades must be able to go through the lands, and this is one of the biggest cost items. So you have to construct roads for one turbine or two turbines, so the roads must allow it. Also, the connection points must be at a suitable distance, and let's say you want to buy the lands and you applied, let's say you submitted your file to the relevant distributor, then you talk to the turbine companies and they ask for measurements. In licensed, even the poles don't represent, so without measures, despite all challenges and difficulties, the land that you find, they have to be suitable for a turbine with the measurement values. So when you add the coefficients, there is a challenge immediately. I read a PwC study. It was 96% to 4% solar to wind distribution. We want to increase the wind investments. So therefore, there are regulations that need to be done. And now that the president is here, the chairman, I want to talk about this. So I'm going to go fast over this. The factories, the energy that they can sell, that they can deduct, has to be proportional with their previous year's consumption. And the factories have seasonal increases and decreases in their generation. For instance, in 2022, this company consumed 20 million kilowatt hours, but unfortunately, they couldn't get enough orders in 2024 or 2025, but perhaps this 1 or 2 year energy, they will have offered it free of charge to the state. This is a good thing for the state, but from an investment standpoint, it's bad for the company. We believe that a buffer system is necessary. So this needs to be assessed not in 1 or 2 years, but in 10 years per se. The second issue is something that we suffer a lot. in the organized industrial zones or in exterior lands, outside free zones, the companies can do it, but we've got clients in free zones and they want to make these investments as well, but the operators of the free zone, in order to prevent their loss, they are not allowed. Let's imagine there's a 30 megawatt power and they can build up to 60 megawatts, but the free zone operator, the energy, there's a certain, they get a certain profit from electricity. They want to pay that too even, but legislation doesn't allow them to do it. So regulation is necessary. And also they can deduct as much as they consume, but they sell the excess. And the companies that build it on their roof, the solars, they don't pay distribution and transmission, but the ones that they do wind, farms in the exterior lands, perhaps a price support is necessary to remedy the gap between distribution. Another issue is incentive. I'm going to ask for your permission because it's going to connect to the next topic. As for the incentives, unfortunately there is this article which stipulates that about the wind, you can benefit from fourth zone incentives with certain exceptions. If the blade generators and turbines which are going to be supplied from overseas. Now it's difficult to explain it in turbines, but let's say differentials, brake system and automobile. So differential brake systems and chassis, or differential brake systems and some other part of the automobile. But the minute it says turbine, my partners are from the Middle East Technical University. We gave blue screens, so it says turbines. There's a mistake there because the companies that invest in wind, this is one of their biggest problems. They cannot benefit from these incentives. And this is how it should be. The components produced in Turkey. If it was tower, blade, and generator, they would have benefited from these investors. Or they are looking for a local aspect in YEKA, that is Renewable Energy Resource Area. If they are given this exception, they can have a bigger maneuvering capability. This is all I can say in the first round. Mr. Bora, you summarized it in the pill form, you know, what the investors need, what they are stuck on. Thank you for explaining this in this format. Mr. Serkan and Mr. Ismet, they are making notes of this. And you gave this 96% solar and 4% wind in the island license. This is the breakdown within itself. The 90% of the established power in solar is unlicensed, and in wind, 96-97% are licensed. So that expression unlicensed is a merciless expression. So when you call unlicensed, people deem it like these are free, but whatever it corresponds to, an unlicensed project. But at all the development stages, they are subject to the same requirements. You know, he gave the ball to Mr. Ismet, but the real balls were sent to Mr. Serkan. You have a presentation, I guess. Let us begin with this. So let's see the extent you can address it. I took all the balls that he sent me. I hope I will score. Thank you. Welcome. I wasn't expecting such a crowd at this time, so I would like to express my gratitude to you. The wind industry is a bit foreigner to the unlicensed side, as you have said. So I want to talk about what is licensed, what is without license. I would like to give, I prepared a presentation. I want he needs the controller, a remote for the slides. In electricity generation, it is the license generation legislation. There's a preliminary licensing, and then licensing and accepting. And there's an exception in license generation. There's an obligation. They're exempt from building a company, and this is the electricity market law number 6446, which Article 6A governs the activities, and paragraph 3 and 6A of the YEKDEM law, that is the extension of renewable energy support scheme. And if they give energy to the grid, how will that be regulated? Paragraph 4 of the law talks about the procedures and principles and the sales and technical regulations and how they will be addressed. And the unlicensed generation is being referred to. And there is the situation that until the past year, unlicensed was one of the biggest problems because in the law 5,346 and the law 6,446 referred to 10 years ago, and what would happen after 10 years? The power was given to the president by paying 15% of the market trade price, or provided that it is the ceiling, the procedures and principles, the implementation will be determined by the president, but we still don't have the presidential decree. And whether they would continue with license or without license, or whether a hybrid model will be used to cover both, will be clarified. This is what we're waiting for. And when we talk about unlicensed generation, there are about 10 types of exceptions, and the most popular one and the famous one is when they contribute to the increase of this installed power, 1 megawatts. By until 2019, these were land, and the ceiling power limit was 1 megawatt, and they were subject to a deduction of hourly, and whatever the generation price, they would get a support. And in 2015, this was increased to 5 megawatts, and it would be at the same location. And 5.1c, this is coming from 14.1b. The production and the consumption would be at the same place, and for the production facilities based on this, there's a licensed generation activity. There is no installed power. The issue is not being able to sell to the grid. It was hourly until 2019, but after 2019 it was monthly deduction. And for the previous facilities, they can shift from hourly to monthly, and the legislation is in effect. And the licensed, unlicensed is 5.1h regulations. There is no restriction without installed power. If it's agricultural, irrigation, or municipal entities, it can go all the way to twice of the connection deal. A production facility can be built, and the deduction period is monthly, and the excess energy is the tariff price is sold for the tariff price. So when you're setting the price, it is the production type, and then it's a consumption-centric approach, and the tariff price that is identified is taken as the basis for us. I am going to cheat from my mobile, the gentleman says. This is a brief summary of 5.1h. What can the investors do? Transmission or distribution level, same or different measurement points. They can build production facilities. There are different measurement places. We don't want them to be we don't need them to be on the same distribution system, because the electricity grid distribution, there are 21 zones, and in unlicensed generation, the consumption and production up to 15H it had to be in the same place. A factory in Konya, they couldn't exceed the Meram, for instance. They couldn't build a generation plant in the province of Van, for instance. And the environmental impact assessment obligations were necessary for marginal agricultural obligations must be fulfilled. And then I talked about the excess energy, and unlike the previous ones, 51H stipulated that before unlicensed investments were in the scope of Article 21 of the connection deal. So if they didn't have a grid investment, that would be made by the investor, and then the distributor company would pay this price gradually. So if a grid investment is necessary as part of 51H, the investor has to bear it, including the permits, and they can transfer to the distribution, or they are obliged to transfer it to the distribution or transmission system. And individuals will be able to establish facilities up to the total amount of their own consumptions in the same area. Holdings or holding companies, they cannot make an investment for all of them, but holding companies can make individual investments. Unlicensed generation, it uses the deduction method or set-off. For a certain amount, you deduct the generation from consumption. So you come up with a net consumption or a generation value. Until 2019, this was hourly. Perhaps you cannot read the figures, but let me summarize it this way. Let's say on the third day, between 15 and 16 hours, 5 megawatt hours were generated and 2 megawatt hours were consumed, and the set-off value was 3 megawatt hours, and that for that excess energy you would get support. And the next hour, or let's say you were on the consumption side and you couldn't generate, you consumed 3 megawatt hours, you had to pay your bills for this, and your generation and your consumption were the total of the deducted hours, which is carried over to the end of the month. You get revenues for your excess energy, and for the energy that you draw from the system, you pay bills according to your current deal. And for the monthly set-off, your meter data is deducted from each other, and you get a net figure. If you're on the plus side, you can get certain supports if you can sell, and if you draw the energy from the grid, you just pay your bills only for that section in between. And I talked about the support prices prior to 2019. Hydroelectricity and wind energy, it was $7.3, so 10.5 for geothermal, and for solar and biomass it was 13.3. And after 2019, based on the current tariffs, this is industrial medium voltage. If the industrial MV, medium voltage, it was single tariff. And if you have low voltage, commercial, it is used based on that tariff.
Tarafta süreç şöyle.
On the licensing part, the procedure is as follows. You get a preliminary license, and then you have to fulfill the expectations, and then you go into the licensing period. Then you have a certain amount of time for the development of this plant, and you have a certain period of time for that. And after that, you go into the licensed operation. On the unlicensed, then you send a letter, which is can be called as a preliminary licensing, and then the connection is licensing, and the on the overtaking of the plant, and the documents are evaluated. If your documents are Then your application is evaluated, and the distribution company doesn't. If the distribution company doesn't have any problem in terms of grid, then you have a technical documentation evaluation. And in this form for the technical evaluation, your application is controlled if there is a This technical evaluation has been done by the transfer company or the distribution company, and then you have a call letter for the introduction into the grid, and there is no capacity defined. But if it's going to be the TEAS has a regional capacity document. This has been published the last time in August of this year, and in a lot of regions there are no capacities left. This is what I can say, and we're going to go into detail. But on the 29th of July, we did a evaluation, and we told also that the capacity will be increased, and TEAS is still working on this. After the agreement, then you have and the preliminary report can be given for 36 months, and for the second part you have 180 days and plus 180 days. And the Ministry of Urbanization you apply to, and the ministry, this sends you in 150 days to the application to TEDAS. In 180 days, these and another 180 days you will receive 180 days for your obligations, and then you have a connection agreement with the distribution company, and then we have a duration from 1 to 3 years. And the if you're not able to build this
Otherwise, we can allocate to new individuals. And for unlicensed generation, there is one component, which is the system utilization price. And there's a specific system utilization price. This is unlike normal generation facilities. And the principle is as follows. If the generation and consumption is at the same place, the system utilization levels are used, and we take system utilization prices at the point, and if they are at the same location, for your generation up to consumption, we don't take system utilization prices, but we take the full amount when you exceed it. And on the other side, let's say you have generated 200 units and consumed 200 units. We don't charge anything, but we charge it for, in the other scenario, let's say you have for the generation up, let's say there's a 200 units of, we give a system utilization price, and then we charge the full amount. And there's a sales limit regulation. Mr. Bora talked about it partially, and Mr. Marish is going to talk about it, so we can move fast. And there are important issues about unlicensed generation, and unlike licensed, we don't do any expropriation, so the investors can find their land and they need to get their permits themselves. And like I said, individuals, real persons and legal entities can only apply for unlicensed production from their own consumption facilities for those in the same subscriber group. And just like buying and the ownership of the place where the production facility will be established is the responsibility of the individuals, and there are no transactions regarding property acquisition related to unlicensed production facilities before, and there are certain criteria which need to be fulfilled. And and the procedures and principles regarding the settlement transactions of productions and consumptions facilities located in the region of different distribution or assigned supply company came into force in July 1, and EPH acted fast and the deduction procedures were initiated. So briefly, these are the figures, and I'm going to end my words. In the current establishment, unlicensed plants, according to TEH data, you see the figures on the screen, which are more legible for you. Wind, I wanted to emphasize particularly. There are a total of unlicensed wind plants with a power of 97 megawatts. And when you look at the solar on the other side, you see over 10,000 plants with close to 9.5 gigawatts of plants. And when you look at the ongoing facilities, these are at the call letter stage, and these are at the connection deal. So these are at the pre-license and license stage. And in solar, there is approximately 15,000 gigawatts. It's 10 to 5, and on the wind side, it's 250 megawatt call letter stage, and 128 megawatts are at the connection deal. And I exceeded the time allocated to me. I would like to apologize to the audience, and thank you very much for listening to me. And I'm going to think about Bora's questions, and I'm going to answer them in the second round. Yeah, I was going to say you didn't answer my questions, but then there's the second round. But all the participants, all our panelists are giving pill-sized information. So you summarized it real well. And in between the lines, Mr. Bora had already mentioned, solar is easy, but why should we do wind? They were saying. But the last chart it gives us hope, because the wind capacity that is built up until now, there's 2.5 times of a capacity is awaiting us on the wind side. Why? Because in the beginning of the session I had talked about this, the energy investors, while unlicensed plants were done by energy investors, but now it is turning into industrial investments after the May 29 regulations. So the industrialists are examining it, and they can determine the advantages of the headwinds. And we're looking forward to the second round, Mr. Serkan. And now I will move on to Mr. Meric. As Mr. Serkan mentioned, 51H is a very important regulatory article which was passed. Right after that, as a legal entity, if I can I merge my consumption and generation under the same legal entity? EPH worked on this, and these have been accepted and commissioned. So right now, it's a part of our current investments. So how is this practice going, merging your consumption and your generation? And will there be different approaches by EPH looking into the future? I have a presentation that has numerical information.
And I want to add some information to the application of these methods. I want to thank everybody for being here. So if we rewind a little bit about the unlicensed plants, and the rate of the unlicensed plants are rising, and this leads to some new perspective. And the production, the generation of unlicensed plants can be sold in the electricity market, and so this means that the generation can be used in the electricity market. And in May 2019 is monthly deductions. So if we look at the numbers of September, the monthly deductions generation is 30% of the total of unlicensed generation, and from the power perspective, it's 25 to 26% in the unlicensed generation plants. And lastly, in this July, the production and consumption facilities can, if they belong to the same legal person or the real person, can be used. So generation can also be consumed by the same producer. So here we needed a coordination for this application, because up until this part, the persons who were reading the meters had control over the data. But with this application, we also needed a synchronization between regions, and we as EPIAS had created a module with non-licensed or monthly deduced plants, and these data and the limits and the information are added into this database, and the producer and consumers are putting this into this data in, and we give them information about how much they can add to the feed into the grid, and how much can they use, and how much they should pay for this supplier. And this is something that if a company has more than one plant in a region, so if there is a surplus of energy creation, this will be paid. And I want to talk about some numbers. The APH data shows us that the amount is of non-licensed generators are around 9%, and we're talking to September. The numbers from October are not in this presentation. And this year, with the 5 terawatt of energy, they have a proportion of 5%, and Konya, Antep, and Izmir is in the forefront. We talked about the monthly deduction, and APH. All of these works can be done over APH. And we talked briefly about this with the 51H. How much of the generated power can be fed into the system when you create a surplus? So the total consumption, if it's not 12 months, you calculate it to 12 months, and if the consumption is higher in that year, there is no loss of rights, so it just adds on top of the feeding rights into the grid. And this monthly deduction, here we have some numbers about the monthly deduction. The licensed is around 11,000, and over 2% of power, operational power, has applied for a monthly deduction, and the total consumption is around 30,000 megawatt hours, and we see also the distribution between regions. But this is in the early stages, so these numbers will get higher, will increase month by month. This is what we are expecting. And on this side, we have the data up until the month September. And I can give you the numbers for October with non-licensed. And the group numbers are 217. And these 217 groups belong to 210 real or legal persons. The generation values are around the same, but the consumption varies. I cannot see the numbers here. The associated consumption plants are small-scale companies, and in general, the amount to be paid for consumption is 68 million liras, and the surplus is around 27 million liras. So in total, it's 95 million liras. So what does this represent? So this is the amount what the licensed companies are expecting was 5 million liras, and we expect that it will increase day by day. Thank you. This is all I have to say.
Teşekkürler Meriç Bey. Gerçekten
Thank you, Mr. Meriç, and the figures give us hope. There's a 10% share that you're talking about in the entire established power, and this is a capacity that we cannot overlook. Hopefully, the unlicensed will keep adding on top of each other. And Mr. Bora said that the turbine companies ask for measurement, wind measurement, Mr. Ismet. Now, turbines are indispensable. It's a sine qua non for this technology. So unlicensed investor, the biggest obstacle before the unlicensed investor is high capacities do not emerge like the cases in license, like 5, 10, 15 megawatts. But nevertheless, the turbine technologies proceed real fast, and even 5 megawatt platforms are already obsolete. So the number of turbines that the investor can build is limited. So 1, 2, 3 turbines, when you receive such clients, how do you handle them? What do you do for those? And do you have different plans for the unlicensed clients? Can you inform us? The gentleman is also requesting the remote. Now, in Turkey, I was born in a small district of Anatolia, and I studied in state school, and I came here. And many of us are sharing similar stories. And this year is a sentimental year for us. And when it comes to wind, Turkey is... we are in a very rare situation. It's the centennial of the anniversary. So when you look at all these gains, these acquisitions, and thanks with the opportunity of the centennial of our republic, I would like to commemorate Mustafa Kemal Atatürk and all the martyrs and those he fought together with. I would like to remember them with my deepest respect. On the other hand, you know, there's a huge traffic here. Because even if you leave early, you won't be able to reach home. So I hope you excuse me, because the presentation that I will give normally takes 2 hours, but I try to shorten it to the best of my ability. And your question is very valuable. How does Enercon view these projects? Because there's 1,200, 360 megawatt projects that we are building, and of course, these are of critical importance in terms of the sustainability of our companies. But look at this, I want to talk about that. The fluctuations in the electricity markets, the security of supply, and coupled with the legislation that is coming from the lawmakers' side, brought a certain acceleration to these projects. And of course, there are financial motives here. But on the other hand, we have a responsibility towards the world, particularly the industrial companies, the companies working in the industry. They have a responsibility towards the world. And I think they are equipped with means that allow them to fulfill such responsibilities. To be able to get this job, Enercon, I debated 6 months with Enercon because the sense of being able to contribute and give to the world is a separate satisfaction altogether. And when we are talking to our clients, to investors, they just put aside the finance and the costs and everything. There are parts that I will make references to Mr. Bora. I made notes of this. And Mr. Bora talked about the processes and how difficult the wind energies are. Wind is not like solar. It's a matter of persistence and resistance and blood and tears and sweat. But despite all the challenges and obstacles and unpredicted expenses, they are doing this with passion, which makes me happy seeing this. Where the world is headed must be observed by the investors. And Mr. Minister Bayraktar talked about this yesterday. The demand for electricity has an increasing trend. The capacity to be able to generate electricity, possessing that capability, is very valuable, and the world is in a transformation of electrification non-stop.
imkanı olanların
And the industrialists who have the opportunity to have can make self-consumption should never forget this. So, of course, we have the carbon regulation on the border. And if you want to send goods to Europe, either you have to offset your carbon footprint, or they have to reach these energies from renewables. In aluminum, in cement, and in fertilizers, we have this problem. And Minister Bayraktar talked about that there will be a regulation for the carbon trade inside Turkey. So this is something the investors have to keep in mind. So, like I said at the beginning, how should the investor look at this subject? So before I started with Enercon, this was a topic of interest for me, and I have also a thesis about this subject. And I talk only about this subject. It's not enough that we supply turbines, wind turbines. The investor says, okay, we build solar and wind parks and we have enough energy. Just open the windows and doors. We don't need to make here sustainable housing. No, we have to lower also the we have to lower also the demand as well as instead of raising the supply. Let's assume you have a compressor. A compressor is a very inefficient process. So if you eliminate pressurized processes with pressurized air, or lower the bar or lower the pressure and turn it into an efficient compressor, then you have a gain. And if you need to still energy, then you take it from renewable sources. So the industrialists should also add another perspective besides building renewable energy plants. So some parts were just spoken about. So I'm not going to talk about legislation. And we talked also about the incentives. And when the wind energies don't have the same incentives, although they work for the same goal. So for the turbine production, we have a national part of 70%. So this should receive an incentive. We have the incentive for the fourth region in Turkey, but it doesn't work like that. This is just on paper. So we have the hub, the blades, and the turbines. So they cannot be evaluated as the same. The turbines, you can see here, in other legislations, it means turbine tower. So we have to ask them, do you mean tower or do you mean turbine plus tower? So we wrote it to the ministry, and we're still waiting for an answer and for the correction of legislation if needed. So the investors are also having these same question marks, and we expect that Turkish investors into the wind energy should also receive the same incentive. And there is an additional tax called the stamp tax, and we should be exempt from this because it is a national resource, because this is the wind, and this is like an integral curve. The faster you maximize the use of resource, the faster you reach a optimum level. And we hope that we will see this change in the legislation. So during developing of a wind project, and afterwards I will talk about how Enercon looks at this subject. So how to develop a wind project? So we have to be aware of the legislation. We have to have enough know-how. We have to have the capacity on the grid, and for the transformators, you need manpower and the know-how. So to the processes, Serkan Bey talked about in depth about this, and I tried to put them all together in one diagram. You talked about 180 days, and this is a long process. It's not easy, but why should we go through this process? So the wind energy cannot compete with solar on the roof. But when you go to the field, to higher elevations, you have the advantages, because wind energy plants work also at night. So when we look at the means in Turkey, we have larger generators here with larger blades, and without sun, it doesn't work. No, because in the world, the high and low pressure zones are created by solar radiation. So we are dependent on the sun. So yes, because we have the sun, we have wind. That is the reason. In comparison with solar, when we look at the Turkey's mean, we see in the Anatolia, of course, it started in Antakya and in the Aegeus, and we can reach 33% of efficiency here. So the electricity you create with a 10 megawatt solar panel, you can create with only one wind turbine. So this means 180 hectares for solar, and then you have only 30 hectares of, or 35 hectares of area for wind energy. And when we think about the cost of land, this is a serious advantage. So we use only half hectare for the tower, and on the rest of the land you can still do agriculture. So this sounds maybe evil when I say we should build wind parks on top of agricultural areas. No, but this is done in Germany, for example. So it's an environmental solution, and what we lose on area is only half an hectare. And the area between, the distance between the turbines has to be a certain distance, so one turbine that wouldn't disturb the agricultural applications. So this is something we should be thinking in the future. This part I should lead for the next part, but let's look at how Enercon looks at the subject. One turbine is one turbine for us. So we are looking from a very principled point of view. We are not discriminating between projects. There are the big players who are on a global scale creating turbines. There are two classes, the small turbine producers like 1 megawatts and large turbine producers like us who create, and we are producing the biggest wind turbines, and we try to produce our biggest turbines, but there is no demand anymore because we have a lot of unlicensed projects or turbines. You can work with unlicensed with turbines with 4 or 5 megawatt production capacity. But this was the reason why we kept this large production of these large turbines. Thank you, Ismet Bey. Our participants stayed here, but I want to underline 5 points, because one of them was, you said the consumption, you have to save before create more production, more generation. So less consumption first and then more generation. This is the first message we can send to industrialists. And then you talked about electrification. That is important. Boone Berlin made a research and they told the amount of heat pump sales is risen 30% after the crisis in the Ukraine, because the heat pumps use electrification for warmth, for heating. And in the other session, they talked, you are saving the agricultural areas, because when you put the wind turbines on top of these agricultural fields, you cannot open these to zoning. So you save these agricultural areas by putting wind turbines on top of them. So, and it's really hopeful that you are also making an agreement for one turbine projects, and this is very good what you are doing in this sense. And in the last part, I want to look at a more humorous perspective. So these turbines helped the landowners, so the value of their land has skyrocketed, and this is something we shouldn't forget. So we have the legislation behind us. So we found our capacity, we have the letter for action, and we found a turbine producer. So if we have this capacity, this is thanks to the creditors, but we have the YECTA mechanism. So you had a buyout guarantee based on dollars, and the banks knew what they would be receiving. But now it's TL, Turkish lira based, and it's variable. So these unlicensed, how do banks look at the financing of unlicensed wind turbines? Thank you. I'm working, I work for a development finance institution. I tried to answer your question, but I would like to thank the TWEC for their invitation. It is an honor to be amongst these panelists, and we shouldn't forget the following. There is the Energy Workers Week, and from the private and public sector, everyone who is involved in the creation of this industry should be applauded in this week, in their week now. So I want to answer it from the development financing agencies. We are not a normal bank. We take funds from abroad and give financing under certain criteria. And when we look at it from the perspective from our bank or similar banks, in terms of the 12th development planning, green energy and sustainable economy is a mission. And there is also financing resources. And the United Nations has also in the financing of climate and low carbon economy and circular economy are keywords for the United Nations. So, and we are trying to comply to it. And we as a bank have left financing for 4,000 megawatts for licensed and unlicensed plants. And a huge amount of our portfolio is also for renewable energies. So our bank is the right address. And renewable energy and energy efficiency is something we are very resourceful. But where do you get these resources? Under which criteria? Might be the next question. So up until today, we have $5.2 billion of funds we brought to Turkey, 40% in the last 3 years. So as a bank, and on a scale with a personnel of 300 people, we have brought a serious amount of money into Turkey. So where did this money come from? From which countries and from which finances? The JICA has sent $160 billion of funds, especially for green technologies and green energy. And there is the Asian Infrastructure Company who gave $100 million for Green Deal and for renewable energies. From the World Bank, we received $150 million for geothermal energy, and we have a distribution method here. And when we have the investments, we can give some financing model. There are some financing models. So the Chinese Development Bank has sent $200 million for SMEs and for energy production. And from the KfW from Germany, we found 100 million euros of credit and 100 million EU grants for this year. And from KfW, we financed 45 million euros, and we applied this. But this is unlicensed solar energy. So when we look at the demand on a project, it's Turkish lira based, and the financing is not possible. So we do a balance sheet financing and their cash. So the financing of their cash flow, and it's not like a self-SPV or non-recourse project financing would not correct our type of financing. But when we say financing, then this is a credit financing that pops into mind. But we as a bank try to use different tools. But these are not for long term, because when we are talking about credit financing, then it has a payback period of 5 to 10 years.
In certain years, certain terms, you get certain terms. And it was first a low carbon energy transition exports was done, and the renewable energy investments were supported by a financing setting as we have provided, which we continue to do, and we have new interviews. You know, the relevant teams are continuing to work on the provision of financing, both the World Bank's undertakings on the renewable side as well as the relevant ministries' undertakings. So the investment setting here is, and the financing setting, we have high expectations, and as a bank, the relevant technical teams as well as the other teams are working on supporting the financial environment. Mr. Verdem, thank you. You gave us hope. So apparently it turns out there's money, which is a great thing. And the finance institutions, how they view the picture, there are differences, as you said. You know, a balance sheet financing approach gives us hope. And this is going to pave the path for industrial investors. So we're going to keep the second round shorter. But there are great questions, so with your permission, I want to continue this way. Perhaps 5 minutes each. And indeed, is it that case? Is that the case, really, Mr. Bora? How do the investors view the financing? Yeah. I will have really, I'm going to continue talking about this. Now, do we have money? That question. Now, it's difficult to answer this question, but let me wrap it up real fast. There are three criteria. One, terms. Two, interest rate. Three, how much of the investment will you be allowed to draw down by the bank? You know, these coefficients, I mean, I think we are worst off these days, the coefficients of those three criteria. 5 to 6 years ago, you could find 10-year, 12-year loans, but there is the global inflationist environment. Back then, it started from 2%, and you could borrow up to 4.55%. Let's say in a 30-megawatt project, if you're talking about a 30 million euro investment, up to 85% of the banks could be pushed. 87%, 90% of it could be obtained as financing. But equities are up to 30%, 35% by the state banks and the private banks, because I don't have much contact with the development banks. There is money, but the terms are shorter. What we said is 10 years are now back down to 5 years, and 3% is up to 5 or 6%, and now you can only get 17, 18 million euros instead of 25 million euros, and this is a brief answer. Thank you, Mr. Borra. And the global conjuncture is not in our favor either, so hopefully these conflicts and all will be resolved, and the access to money, and with the removal of the inflationist environment, it will be much better. Mr. Serkan, about the parts that you wanted to answer in the first round, we can receive your answers, but please keep it short.
Açılmadı herhalde ama.
Şöyle,
So, okay, I'll try to be brief. But let me first and foremost state that when we talk about legislation, it is put into effect once, but it is not definite. It can be modified. And in the unlicensed side, those who are interested know that one of the legislation that is it is modified the most, but thankfully there hasn't been any modifications this month. So back in 2019, when it was being planned, it was limited to roofs for the unlicensed side, turned into home consumption, generation was divided, but the happiness lasted only a year, and it was followed by another modification and an amendment with the law, with all the incentives and everything. Regulations went through yet another change. So what about the current legislation? This Cell limit, you said, couldn't it be based like 10 years? But this should be based on an hourly fashion. This is how it is managed. There is an hourly setting. This is how it is settled. We first set a price, and if there is a mismatch, it is carried into the daytime market. And if there is an imbalance, then the balancing markets kick in, and this is how we generate. This is how we balance production, generation, and consumption. But of course, we wanted to ease the mechanism. But this monthly settlement turned out to be a great challenge. So you generated 100 units and then consumed another 100 units. You never sold anything, you never consumed anything, that's okay. But also, there are companies out there that is like beaten up by all the mechanisms and everything. And we pay over the active consumption, and this is how we settle that month. And while setting up pricing, if you have to extend this timing, then we don't know how to bring balance to this money situation. We checked the feasibility. I mean, it could be, but we couldn't come up with a reasonable solution. So if you have any recommendations, we would be more than happy to hear what you have to say. 10 years, it's not that possible, but especially for agricultural irrigation issue, yes, we see that there are some challenges because irrigation happens in a specific time in the year, and that's when they need it. But then they generate until April, but cannot sell because there are limits. And then after April, they start consuming, and you cannot put this mechanism into effect backwards. So what do we do? Well, we try to change it, but in the regulation, the rule now is to consider the previous year's consumption. And if there is an increase in the consumption in the referred year, then there will be some arrangement. And what about free zones? There is a technicality of it and the economic side of it. Turkey is not a free zone. There are some zones that offer exemptions, incentives on the tax side. There are some, allocated free zones, fine, special zones. But if an unlicensed investor, but I mean, you cannot treat those zones like unlicensed investors or the general public. But it wouldn't be right or it wouldn't be just. So what about the technicality? Free zone means one subscription, something similar to shopping malls, but other subscribers cannot do it differently. If a facility is not consuming, and if it's only consuming but not generating, they cannot invest in another area or cannot join the free zones. But what did we do as an incentive? If the free zone allows, then the meters will be taken into place and there will be some calculations and arrangements, and only then it'll be allowed. But if there is an input in the grid, and because of the special position of this free zone, they are then regarded as an investor. And since 2017, they always talk about this 75% incentive, and then we removed it. I mean, the tariff mechanism is out there. There is a maximum revenue limit for generation. TEİAŞ, EPİAŞ, there are some, upper limits for revenue, and for the transmission companies, there is a price to pay. But where will that come from? It'll come from the electricity consumers, actually. The more you can collect, the more you can distribute. And assuming that the grid would potentially need to expand, then it's going to need money. But will that money come from consuming facilities, licensed facilities, or unlicensed facilities? When you bring everything in the same basket, then okay, it looks reasonable to set yet another consumption price, but it's all up to how the money moves. If energy costs can be reduced, if transmission and distribution lines can be improved, and if we do not need any further investments, then prices will drop. But in the case of a need for further investments, then transmission costs will naturally rise. I think not. You had a fourth question, but I didn't note it down because it wasn't my area of expertise. Okay, that was a great summary. Thank you so much. In the morning, there was a meeting for the industrial leaders and EPDK chairman, Mr. Mustafa, but also Mr. Varang. And the main focus of the meeting was predictability. Unit costs rose in electricity, and that is why distribution costs increased. Okay, but predictability is, self-explanatory. It'll bring predictability. It'll help us with proper calculations and everything. This could be noted down. Okay, but Mr. Serkan, you said it is not definite. It can change. It can be modified, you said. And of course, authorities and all related parties are trying to improve the legislation, and they are working around the clock. They're putting out a great work, and of course, it should be appreciated. But how do you see it on the public side, Mr. Meriç Emre? I think I can answer the second question here. Mr. Serkan also talked about the challenges of this monthly settlements. But looking in reality, I think it is there to bring a bit of a relief to the investors. But on the other side of the coin, there are still issues that is tried to be, dealt. But then such things can bring about further obstacles and issues because you are having this monthly settlements, but there is also this hourly supplier situation. So which cost will apply it, how, where, when? And sometimes investors question the current mechanism. Okay, so you have this amount of money or you receive an invoice from the supplier, but is this the correct one? How to check it, how to control it, This is also required. And some suppliers, of course, want to see the proof of that sum total, and we try to let them know about the methods. Consumption is one side, generation is on the other side. You calculate it like this, like that. We try to inform them, but obviously this is not enough. Maybe we can share a document that brings together the related data so that the investors can know what the calculations are based on. So this could be a good improvement. But as EPİAŞ, we are active in gas market, in electricity market, the daytime market, and it might face yet another change. But we're talking about a lot of things like the balancing details, the supply side, demand side. Okay, we are working around the clock, but and sure, we want to fulfill our responsibilities and contribute to the ongoing endeavors. And TEİAŞ will also take responsibility as like a complementary service provider here. And Mr. Serkan also emphasized the matured, unlicensed facilities. If they are relicensed, the procedure is there. but it is not feasible for every facility to have a license, and this would not be that favorable either. And of course, we have to wait and see the latest regulation to see how each party or each stakeholder is categorized or defined. So we have to wait and see the modification, and once we have a clarity, we will take necessary actions, and we do not want to delay the process any further, because as it is stressed in the morning sessions, the change is just too rapid, and the public side criticizes as such, okay, we ease the processes, but then the demands skyrocket, the trends change really fast, really rapid, so we cannot keep up. But as EPH, we are here to do whatever it takes. We are here to assume responsibilities, and we want to be ready to move forward as a regulator. Yes, we witness how much of a great effort you put. I mean, yes, the unlicensed situation is apparent, but we are still waiting for storage capabilities. And the 15 minutes price prediction development, then it'll be way better. So we're almost out of time, but I have to ask this question. When we were students, we couldn't buy brand new laptops. We could only buy refurbished ones. So can this be the thing for the unlicensed? I mean, okay, you want to repower, you want to expand, and you want to increase the number of turbines. Maybe, you know, you can get their small turbines, refurbish, and make them larger and offer it back to unlicensed investors. Could this be a thing? I mean, I wonder what you have to say.
Malzeme döngüsü ve
The material cycle and the mines being used in the right quantity, it's an important topic in terms of not wasting them. But there is this issue about repowering. It's a new thing for the world, because when you produce such turbines, you give them a life of 25 years, because it gets tired in every sense. So at the end of the day, the turbines grow real fast, and from a commercial standpoint, it starts losing its feasibility. And on the other hand, there is also the security-related issues and concerns which could approach. And as I said, there are too many unknowns for the world. Likewise for the turbine producers, because we haven't discovered what to do by 100%. If they can be used, they should be used. But on the other hand, let me give one example. When you buy a turbine, there is a very special service contract that you get that is not seen in any other industry. I haven't seen it elsewhere, and let me summarize it this way. So let's say you bought an automobile for 2 million liras. So 1.5% of it, a 30,000 lira amount, an automotive producer cannot offer you, 40, 15 years, 20 years, every year, give me 30,000 liras, and in return, let me do your routine maintenance, and when your vehicle gets, the pistons and the engine have swollen, etc., let me replace everything free of charge, and let me monitor your vehicle round the clock, and let me keep its performance positive at all times, and let me check the fuel consumption. So if it gets old, I didn't see such an opportunity anywhere. But when we're selling wind turbines, we're giving this opportunity to our clients. And as for repowering, and let me summarize it for those who don't know, this is, let's say, in a plant that was installed 20 years ago, like 44-meter blade diameter sweeping area, and if they replace it with a bigger one and the second-hand turbines, can the unlicensed client use this? You know, there's no legislation foundation for this there is nothing that governs the second-hand turbines. But even if there is, the turbine seller or the manufacturer, you know, it's very difficult for us to give you that warranty. No matter how much we renew it, we cannot give the same servicing options because they were manufactured 20 years ago, 15 years ago. Do they keep the molds for them, you know, because we can give them spare parts warranty for 15 or 20 years, but after a certain point of time, you even lose that know-how because those blades, those components were manufactured by the people who are retired now already. And when you want to offer them any spares, you know, you cannot manufacture them immediately, etc. But, you know, this could be possible. Let's say there's a 10 turbine repowering that is and if you do a 6 turbine project, you can keep the 4 as spares. But mostly this has, you know, this seems to be a burden on the investor because providing them support as a turbine manufacturer, those people have already left the company. And we had a similar thing, and there was an unlicensed plant that we did earlier. It was in the yard of the factory. They said, let us dismantle this, carry it elsewhere, and I bought a small land, and only this would fit there, said the investor. But we don't know whether, and they said, I can put a bigger turbine, but they were built using concrete. You know, they had tension ropes and adhesives, and when you dismantle them, you know, all the concrete collapses and it's shattered. You know, you cannot do the research and development for this because the investor wants a bigger one. And so repowering has certain dilemmas associated with it. It is doable, but then there's a separate area of business needs to address this, needs to focus on this, because it's very difficult for the turbine sellers to provide the services. I would like to see my presentation now on the screen. The investors need to be careful about certain issues when they are buying turbines. You know, we have a lot of second-hand. We don't want to be misunderstood when we're talking about reservations about second-hand. You know, we talked about service agreements, and we tell the investor. I want the Enercon's presentation to be pulled up on the screen. We tell the investor these turbines. It's in minimum 95%. If they should have 95% availability, free of any failures, and we will be monitoring them round the clock. And whenever there's a failure, we're going to reinstate them, and we're going to make the routine maintenance for them. And if one component is damaged, that would be a cost of 300,000 to 500,000 euros, which we are undertaking, and the production losses can be covered up to a certain extent. You know, getting a good service contract should be the #1 priority for investors, because when you're deciding on these, when you're buying the wind turbines, you put it in your chart. And also for the second hand, this is the price, this is the product generation, electricity generation, and this is my capex, how much I should invest, etc. You list them, but I also want to convey another message, which is about on the investor side. I don't know what is much perceived or understood, and perhaps the importance will be understood a few years later. Turbines have grown a lot, and the problems will grow in the same production. So such turbines will not stay like they stayed in the Excel sheets. And Mr. Mahmoud talked from Ateş Steel. He said sometimes you need to put Excels aside. You know, you're going to need a technical assessment because the Excels could show you that the turbine is very feasible. But if something happens to it, if it doesn't just work or run, we can compensate it up to a certain point, and the rest will be the problem of the investor. And Zorlu was talking about how they carried out the maintenance activities. Actually, about the measurement pole, let me tell you something. In order to be able to provide these warranties, we ask for the turbulence, the fatigue of the blades. Every time it moves up, it's going to receive high winds, and it's going to flex back back, and then when it goes down, it's going to flex less. So it's going to be exposed to such fatigue for 20 years, 25 years. So if it's broken, if it's broken, we give you warranty. To be able to say that, we have to be sure of that blade, and that measurement pole is essential for us because the legislation didn't ask that from us, and the turbines were highly resistant turbines, which were smaller. And the standard deviation measurement pole driven, there are certain sets of data that are derived from the measurement pole, and we can catch the conflicts there, but they should be obtained properly because sometimes in the fields there could be different measurements and they could be applicable to other projects, and the investor might not need to place a new post and they can just buy the data. But at the end of the day, a good measurement is good for the investor and for the warranties that we can offer. With your permission, I would like to say a few messages and then I would like to close. This is how I talked about the measurements, the service, and the investors need to be careful about. I will explain it with the Excel sheet that I will show, but before that, like I said, we are trying to do the engineering in the best way possible. We are an engineering company as Enercon, and we do that very sensitively. And we are trying to provide it in such a way that where we are confident. Let's say a turbine stopped one day at 20%, 30% of the year. It just stopped, and you couldn't provide the spare parts. No matter what the Excel says, you will be in the red. You will lose. So what we want to tell the investors, all the feasibilities aside, we need risk analysis. Would I face this or not? Which generator, which producer, which technical company, which service provider would help me not face these conditions should be the #1 recommendation. This is what we want. And on one hand, the investors in Turkey are very beneficial because in Turkey there are great turbine manufacturers and they are settled here, they work well, and they've got great service networks here. So when you face such a problem, a company with no footprint, let's say they were struck by lightning and the blade is broken, it's no one's fault. There's company that can bring it in 6 months, and there are some that could bring it in a fortnight. And there are many producers that are trying to enter into the market, and of course it's everyone's own discretion, but you cannot enter it in the Excel sheet. How do they view Turkey? What if they fail to find their expectations and leave the country 2 years ago, which is currently the case actually? So this must be taken into consideration, and our company is strong. Our footprint, the orders we collect, how we view Turkey, at least for us, for investors, this is something that is easily understood. I will show a few slides. And what should they be careful about when they are doing this? There's a feasibility study, an example one that I would like to see, because many investors are aware of the fact that they can do solar, but they are not aware that they can also do wind. And we've got requests about incentives, about the predictability of the distribution prices. I wrote some, but there are many assumptions also. The EPDK website, I just collected, I just took it yesterday. The energy consumption fee and the distribution fee and the industrial tariff, and there's a long-term 2%. I converted it to euros. I took 30 as the exchange rate, and I said in the long term it would increase by 2% because I don't have any other long-term predictions, and this is the responsibility of any investor. But predictability is important in that regard. For wind, unlicensed wind farms, the feasibility studies, I set a generic project right, like I added on the turbine price, civil construction and road expenses, foundation, as well as electrification expenses, electricity connection expenses. So it's a 6 million euro turbine, let us assume, with the exception of the land. That's a manipulative market, which I can't tell anything about. Let's imagine we bought a turbine for 6 million euros. And it was produced in 24, and then it starts operations in 2025. You pay the money in 23, in 24 the money is no use to you. Starting from 25, with the turbine becoming active, the investor will be able to set these off from his electricity bill. So in this scenario, which is an ideal scenario actually, with a capacity factor of 32, 33, 160 turbines, 4.5 years later, this is Article 51H, you know, the distribution fee is paid on the drawing side. This is medium voltage scenario in the distribution network. 4.5 years later, it's in the black in terms of cash flow. It's 35 million euros. I'm going real fast here. If they can get financing, there is money, but if they can access it, and let's say there's an 11% euro interest on today's prices, if there's a 1-year grace period with an installment of 5 years, with a term of 5 years, this is a utopic scenario. They didn't pay anything. It's a 1-year grace period, 24. Starting from 25, with 5-year installments, they paid what you saw on the chart. In 24, in 25, it's operational, the turbine. So the loan repayment, even that amount, is a very small sum compared to the size of the project. It's a low sum. It's 173,000 euros in the red, but in 28, 29, you are in the black. You have a positive cash flow. I'm going to talk about Article 51C. You're not paying any distribution fees. When you ROI is 4 years, when you pay upfront and 55 million euros in the long term, and when you pay it with loans, you're never in the red. It's always in the black because distribution fee is not paid because it's not that small anyway. And there's always a positive cash flow with which you can fulfill the project. A few final photographs. This is the village ferrosteel. There are 2 factory yard turbines, no distribution fee. The most recent ones, E160. This is our list of references. And we are using our technology well. This is another criterion, because will your own technicians intervene in the turbine? Does the turbine need it? Does it necessitate it? Because we're talking about ferrosteel or textile or cement companies, but that is not the core business. The turbine should not necessitate intervention, and Enercon has high references. Starting from the first unlicensed project, we had many projects, and we have a market share of 70% in the installed power in unlicensed in Turkey, and some are under construction. We shared good news, and so do not miss this wind. And I'm sorry for keeping you waiting, and thank you very much.
İsmet Bey, rica ederiz. Çok güzel bilgi.
Thank you, Mr. Ismet. Thank you for all the details you shared. You know how say this is not a recommendation for investment, but this could be. No, I mean, we were bearing responsibilities, but I stated it. Yes, I pay attention to that detail. But all investors should go for their own feasibility reports. But for the second-hand market, as far as I have understood, it is still early. Maybe in 2025 you will see the formation of such a market, but as for the moment it is just too expensive because of all the details. And final word, Erdem, Mr. Erdem Sezer. I mean, actually, Mr. İsmet Habir.
Gerçekten feasible yatırımlar gözüküyor. 4 yıl, 4,5 yıl return of investment gibi süreler var. Ama tabii bazen finansal enstrümanlara değişmesi gerekiyor. İşte 2 gündür konuşuluyor. Yenilenebilir enerji tedarik anlaşması diyebileceğimiz YETA'lar, PPA'ler yani. Onların gündeme gelmesi sektörün beklentisi. Onun dışında enerji performans sözleşmeleri var. Bizlerin de enerjisi olarak yaptığımız sözleşmeler. Bu tür alternatif finansman, alternatif yatırım araçlarına, enstrümanlarına finans kuruluşları nasıl bakıyor? Bu konuyla alakalı görüşlerini alırsanız seviniriz.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum Sayın Başkan. Tabii konvansiyonel yöntemler her zaman için geçerliliğini sürdürse de değişen dünyada, değişen trendler, değişen market yapısında aslına baktığınızda farklı enstrümanlarda her zaman için dikkate almakta fayda var. Enerji performans sözleşmeleri ya da YETA'lar ya da PPA'ler olarak adlandırmış olduğumuz uzun vadeli anlaşmalar, yani benim en azından enerji piyasasında olduğum dönemde long term dediğimiz, yani uzun vade en fazla 1 sene şeklindeydi. Tabii bunu sizin 7 sene, 8 sene, hatta 10 senelere kadar çıkartmanız gerekiyor. Şimdi bankacılık perspektifinden baktığınız zaman bu anlaşmaların belli bir nakit akışını sağlayabiliyor olması lazım. Nakit akışını sağlarken de bir takım fiyat garantilerini sağlıyor olması lazım. Anlaşmayı yapan tarafların bir takım teminatlandırma koşullarını sağlıyor olması lazım. O yüzden her birine ayrı ayrı bakmak lazım. Yani YETA tek başına bir finansman aracı olarak kullanılabilir demek çok doğru değil tabii ki de. Proje özeline bakmak gerekiyor buna. İlgili taraflar özeline bakmak gerekiyor. Yani o iki işte o YETA'yı sağlayan taraflar noktasında, bilanço noktasında, mevcut faaliyetleri noktasında hangi durumdalar, nasıl bir yapı var ona bakmak gerekiyor. Yani direkt bir cevap olarak olmaz ya da olur demek çok mümkün değil. Gerçekten de proje spesifik bakmak lazım. Ama şunu söylemekte de fayda var. Şu an geldiğimiz dünyada, yani benim en azından gözlemlediğim dünyada finansman tarafında özellikle tabii ki döviz ağırlıklı bir finansman var. Tabii burada rate'ler yüksek, yani görece, vadeler sınırlı ama yine de biz bunları kullanıyoruz. Nasıl kullandırıyoruz? Tabii burada şu ön plana çıkıyor. Döviz girdisi olan ihracatçı şirketler, sanayiciler tabii ki de burada bir adım önde oluyor. Yani bunu söylemek durumundayız. Hem katma değerli üretim yapan, ihracat odaklı çalışan ve döviz girdisi olan, bilançolarında bunu net bir şekilde gösterdikleri vakit doğal olarak döviz ile alakalı finansman seçeneklerini pahalı da olsa da vadeyle alakalı bir takım kısıtlama olsa da değerlendirmek durumunda kalabiliyorlar. Bu önemli. Keza kaldı ki biz kalkınma finansmanı kuruluşları arasında küresel ölçekte baktığınızda iklim finansmanı noktasında yapılan taahhütler 2020 sonrası 66 milyar dolara geçti. Bu 2015'ler 43 milyar dolar civarındaydı ama şurada şöyle bir rakam vermek istiyorum. Diyeceksiniz tamam 66 milyar dolar üzerinde bir iklim finansmanı taahhüdü var dünyada. Türkiye bunun ne kadarını utilize ediyor, ne kadarını kullanıyor? Bilmiyorum ne kadarlık bir rasyo baktığınızda ama ben hemen söyleyeyim çok da şey yapmadan %2 civarında. Yani çok çok düşük bir miktar. Bizim aslına baktığınızda evet vade, faiz vesaire bunlar kritik hususlar ama ve lakin bizim bu oranı arttırmamız gerekiyor ki Türkiye getireceğimiz miktar da aslında finansman noktasında artsın. Şimdi YETA'lar dedik, kalkınma finansmanlı kuruluşları çerçevesinde getirmemiz gereken miktarın arttırılması lazım dedik. Öte yandan aslına baktığınızda Merkez Bankası'nın bir yatak kredisi vardı. Yatırım taahhüt avans kredisi, o TL bazlı bir krediydi ve uzun dönemde de o aslında kullandırıldı. Öz tüketim projeleri de bundan istifade etti politika faizinin düşük olduğu dönemlerde. Tabii bizim ilave TL finansman ihtiyacımız var kaynak açısından. Yani bu elzem ama ve lakin tabii diyeceksiniz ki faizler ne olacak ama faizler de ortada. Yani hani onda söyleyecek bir şey yok çünkü döviz bazlı aldığınız zaman da bir meblağ var ortada. TL tarafında da var ama tabii ki de burada TL finansman için uzun vade açıda gidermek gerekiyor. Son dönemde özellikle görmüş olduğumuz başka bir yapı, hepinizin yakından takip ettiğini düşündüğüm halka arzlar. Yani sanayi özellikle müşterileri halka arz yaparak oradan elde etmiş oldukları finansmanı da aslında yeşil dönüşüm projelerine, enerji verimliliği projelerine dönüştürebiliyorlar. Nihayetinde kredi, PPA'ler özellikle bir finansman aracı olarak yani kullanılabilir mi? Kullanılabilir ilgili koşullar sağlandıkça. Halka arzlar keza devam eden halka arzlardan belli bir meblağ en azından özellikle izahnamenede ya da fiyat tespiti raporlarında bilhassa yeşil dönüşüm projesine ayrıldığını gösteriliyor olması bizim için ümit verici aslında baktığınızda. Ve son olarak da Türkiye için sermaye piyasaları anlamında bizim yabancı ilgisini çekmemiz gerekiyor. Yani siz yabancı finansmanı ya da ilave finansmanı ülkeye sokmak istiyorsanız yabancı yatırımcıyı da ülkeye sokmamız gerekiyor. Biz tabii ki de Türk sanayicisini desteklemekten bir kalkınma bankası olarak çok mutluyuz. Ama yatırım ortamının iyileştirilmesi ya da finansman ortamının iyileştirilmesi için de yabancı yatırımcıyı da ülkeye getirebilmek gerekiyor. Çünkü yabancı yatırımcı biliyorsunuz ki kural bir yabancı finansmanı da beraberinde getiriyor. Bu minvalde ben finansman ortamının ilerleyen vadede daha iyi olacağını ümit ediyorum en azından.
Gerçekten yüreğimize su serptiniz. Bizim için de güzel haberler verdiniz. Çok teşekkür ederim. Gerçekten çok verimli bir oturum oldu. Umarım katılımcılar da fayda sağlamışlardır. Bu saate kadar kaldığınız için ben hem panelistlerimizi hem de katılımcılarımızı alkışlamak istiyorum. Çok teşekkür ederiz. Zannedersem süremizi oldukça aştık. Onun için bana işaret de geliyor boşaltmamız yönünde. Ama belki bir, belki iki soru alabiliriz eğer varsa. Çünkü bu saate kadar kaldınız bence hak ediyorsunuz. Ama yoksa da soru kapatabiliriz. Soru yok. O zaman kapatıyoruz. Çok teşekkürler. Görüşmek üzere.